I get all 3 chairs.
All right. Welcome to real life, everybody. I'm just, before I start the panel, just going to give a little bit of background. My name is Charlie O'Donnell. I am a partner, sole partner at Brooklyn Bridge Ventures. Brooklyn Bridge Ventures invests in pre-seed and seed startups in and around New York, usually leading or co-leading. Happy to do the work if somebody else wants to lead. VCs are not known for wanting to do a lot of work, so I'm fine to do that as well, or fine to take a back seat if somebody else wants to do the heavy lifting. And generalist investor, so everything from companies making mushrooms to the last couple of term sheets I handed out were one is in the safety around self-driving, another one is in the pet space, and I've done like information security. So I don't think you can get more random than those 4. Actually, before we get into it, just as people are trickling in, does anybody have any general fundraising related questions that they would like to make sure the panel covers in some way? Maybe we'll take like 3 or 4 and I'll try and weave the narrative into that. Sure.
I know a lot of what we're going to be talking about is going to be the seed round, but I'd also love to know, like, you're going to be talking about some of the pre-seed aspects of it leading into the seed round, just to give it a more complete picture.
Gotcha. Yeah, and you guys might be calling your thing a seed. Depending on how much they accomplish in this round is whether they'll retroactively call this a pre-seed or a seed. So we'll see how that goes. But we definitely talk about that. Anybody else? Sure.
Setting a value.
Valuation, okay. Anybody else? Yeah.
Can you talk about how if you've had previous investment items, these are convertibles,
okay,
how do you think about those in relationship to, it's sort of the piggyback to valuation of the first price round?
Right, like how does the first check come in, and then what security do you decide to do, and all that sort of stuff. Cool, all right, last one.
Sure. Core operating people to be partners with, what's the basic structure?
Initial team and co-founders and all that? Okay, awesome. Great. Oh, one more question.
Just like the relative weight of things like that's assigned to things like revenue versus product versus stage of product versus size of market.
In the pitch, like how important was each thing to investors?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Cool. Well, why don't we kick it off and we'll have you guys introduce yourself. So, Kelly, you want to kick it off and your company?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Ifill. I'm the founder and CEO of Guava. We're a digital bank and community platform designed for Black entrepreneurs and small business owners. We're pre-seed. We have a product in beta right now, and so we're kind of opening up our wait list as well.
And were you public about how much you raised, or?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay.
We raised in total $2.4 million.
Okay, cool.
Hi everyone, my name is Winson Wong. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Peat. So Peat is a circular waste company. We essentially turn food waste into fresh mushrooms. We have an indoor farm in Maspeth in Queens currently. We're building out our second farm now. We predominantly work with restaurants, food distributors, and grocery stores, anyone that generates food and have a lot of food waste. So we take their food waste and then we grow mushrooms on the food waste itself to take it out of landfill essentially, and then we sell it back to the food generators that we work with. So it's a very circular economy that way, as a goal of just reducing greenhouse gas emissions, as well as making it more affordable for a lot of these restaurants to work with us as well, to be able to grow the market that way. So yeah, that's what we do.
Gotcha. And I don't know if you want to be public.
Oh yeah, we raised $1.7 million. Yeah.
Gotcha. Literally, I think I wrote my check last week.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
And we'll talk about the length of time it took for that to come in and how that went. But so we're going to do this kind of chronologically, and we're just going to go back to the initial, like, I'm a founder, I think I've got an idea, I might want to move forward with this. And so my first question is, like, how did you get comfortable with this idea is worth pursuing? Like, what was that process like? So Kelly, want to start off?
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer because it was not, for me at least, like one moment where it was like, haha.
It wasn't a light bulb?
No, like that's crazy for me. But I worked in venture before starting this. So I think part of working with startups kind of normalized the idea of this. But I had also kind of on the side worked with Black founders when they were raising friends and family rounds or trying to raise it. And that kind of like nights and weekend work kind of took me to the research around the racial wealth gap, which like gave this academic language for what I had experienced and what I was seeing day to day. I was like, oh, okay, like this is a thing that I want to focus on, and doing it, like my core belief is that entrepreneurship can generate like material net worth for families, right? Like that is the thing that we know to be true, like why we're all sitting here. I experienced that. My grandmother had a cleaning business and like Robert Redford was her client. Like I'm here because of her. And I know that like the segment of Black entrepreneurs that are raising or that are building tech venture backable companies is like infancy, whatever that word is. It's very small. But there are like countless small businesses that have these like structural hurdles in front of them. And so if I could create something to help them with my thinking, then I can help people kind of realize this net worth and kind of close this racial wealth gap, blah, blah, blah. And so for me, it was like these like very small steps. I did a program in the summer, like during the pandemic, for founders, and that helped again to normalize the idea of me leaving my job and not having health insurance during a pandemic, which is crazy. I know, but I curse a lot. I'm sorry.
There's some parent now that is like reporting our YouTube feed. We're sorry, the live stream just shut down. It's fine.
And so I raised a little bit of money from friends and family, and some investors that I had known from like my previous life. And
so don't jump ahead.
Okay.
We're not into the raising part. We're just. Okay.
But I guess the thing was like I knew that I didn't have a safety net to be able to say like I could just leave my job and try and do a thing. It was like, all right, well, this thing is going to cost money, so how am I going to like how can I rationally do this if I care about it this much? And it was the only thing that I was thinking about. Like I had a job, but I wasn't working on it at all at that point. So it was like, all right, I'm going to focus here.
So it sounds like you started with the problem first before the product.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
You researched like,
absolutely.
If I want to solve this problem, I'm open to what product might come out of that.
Yeah, like this is the third iteration of what like a solution for the problem was for me. Like I care about the problem, I care about the people I'm solving for, and like how I get there is kind of not important. I didn't wake up one day and say like I'm going to start a neobank. Like that wasn't what moves me. What moves me is solving this problem, and so however I get there is important.
And is this current iteration the thing you raised on, or did anybody invest in other previous iterations?
No, this is the iteration.
This is the iteration that you raised on. And what was the timing from like, I want to solve this problem, I think this is a thing, to 2 iterations later, I'm now pitching for iteration 3, and this is definitely the thing?
Years. So
okay.
I was working, and I don't know that I at the time thought about it in that way, but you know how you can retroactively connect the dots.
It all makes sense.
Right, everything. This is all planned. I think in 2018, I like actively started working with Black founders, talking about the racial wealth gap and the impact it was having as people were trying to raise friends and family rounds. And so I was doing that kind of nights and weekends. And then I remember actually whiteboarding with a good friend in February of 2020 about, like, that was V2. We were whiteboarding of what is now Guava. And then kind of through the pandemic came up with what is now V3.
Gotcha, awesome. How about you? what's the first, you also went through some iterative
100%,
cycles.
yeah. So, so just a little background. So my family's been in the food business my entire life. So food has always played an important part of my life. My little background before that, I've been working in startups for the last decade. So I never really started working in food until I was actually working in a pet care company where I was running early stage investments, investing a lot of sustainability and upcycling startups, and that's where really started reigniting my passion for looking at waste and really thinking through the impact that we have on the world as humans, obviously. So I left that company just wanting to pursue my own thing. So when we first started, we were just building out a composting company. I don't know how much you know about waste hauling in the city, but essentially like
I'm assuming we're all familiar with waste hauling in the city.
But like everything that you see, like predominantly 95% of food waste goes into landfill, 85% of recycling still goes into landfill. Even though they separate out everything still goes into landfill. It's terrible. Anyways, so it's a problem that we wanted to solve for. So when we first started, we were looking at a very different model. It was just purely composting, hyper-local composting, trying to just run a logistics business. That did not work from a value creation perspective, just really hard to be able to create that density and that scale. And people just didn't want to switch. And because we knew that commercial restaurants, food generators, grocery stores generate actually like 40 to 45% of food waste in this city, we want to solve for that problem rather than the residential problem. Residents would not pay for food waste. They're not going to pay, right? So commercial, they would pay for it. So we need to create more value for them, and that's how we got started in solving the problem. A lot of investors actually ask us, why mushrooms? And the truth is we want to solve for the food waste problem. And in order for those to solve the food waste problem, fungi is one of the best natural decomposers of food waste in this world, in the entire world. So for us, why not try growing mushrooms out of it and see what happens? And we started doing that. Our CTO has a background in food waste, in biology and chemistry, and yeah, and we were successful. Now we grow a lot of different species. We're optimizing our yield all the time, and we're now able to sell it back to the restaurants. And the restaurants love the story that they're able to take that food waste and use it to serve their customers. So that's been going well. Yeah.
A question about the iterative process. When you first set out on this, sort of local composting, and you're like, okay, this doesn't work. How do you just be honest enough with yourself, because you got excited about doing your own thing.
Yes.
You penciled out some math and it didn't quite work. And I run into a lot of founders where I think they secretly know their thing is not working, but it's hard, right?
Yeah.
You decided you're focused on something, you convince yourself, oh, well, we'll make it work, we'll force the issue.
Yeah.
Are you just a naturally really honest with yourself kind of person, or did you work with anybody else who you had that accountability with to say, this is not it, move on to something else?
Yeah, that's a good question. So similar to Kelly, we raised a little bit of money. I think, we went out to talk to some investors, obviously, and quickly realized that, the model just wasn't moving fast enough, right? So, and I think it was a little bit of a time pressure, plus let's really look at the numbers properly and just go, is this a business that we truly think is going to be able to scale within the next year or two to be able to get some product market fit, to show some traction? And the truth is it wasn't going to move fast enough. When we talk to our customers too, they just don't want to switch. We did a lot of sales outreach and people just don't want to switch. So we just realized that wasn't enough to make a business. So that's where, we made the decision to look at something else,
So when you finally got something that you said, okay, I think this can work, you have to make that spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet, which everybody makes, and I'm actually working with an intern, trying to make this part easier, but everybody does the same Google sheet, which is these are all the people I'm pitching, here's some people it's color-coded, some people it's numbers, but pass, still meeting, needs intro, you share it with all your angels, who knows this person, right? Maybe there's a little blurb about what they specialize in or stage or all that sort of stuff. But you have to source the names from somewhere and just figure out who gets on that list. So, Kelly, how did you populate the who do you even go to? We need a little background in venture, so maybe you knew some people from that. But
yeah, I knew some people, so it was like using them. Actually, I think even before that, I just like did the research of like, okay, who cares about what I'm talking about? So impact, fintech, banking, and so it's just like that's the list, like that's the starting point, and then sharing it with
so really tactically, are you just Googling?
Oh,
who
okay.
cares?
Oh,
like,
absolutely.
are you going to Crunchbase?
I'm going to
pay for
Crunchbase. No, I don't pay for things. I'm like, do you have a Crunchbase login that I can use or PitchBook? So I'm sharing passwords with everybody, or getting everybody's passwords rather. So Crunchbase, PitchBook, and then there's what's that other one? It's like NFX. Yeah, that one, which is kind of creepy because they like constantly add people to it. I don't know how that works. So I used those. I looked at, like, my thing was like I'd go to the Crunchbase of companies that were similar to me or similar stage, and then see who invested in them, and then go to
but
like.
Not completely competitive.
No, even if they were
Okay.
like, because there is no one talking about like Black neobanking, right? Like there are two companies, and so even if there are neobank investors, they are either bullish on the space, so great, I want to add them, or they have like information and I can use them to like, kind of tool my pitch because they hate the space now and are really like against it. And so for me, that was strategic to say like, I want to talk to you because like you've been burned. So what can I learn about how I, articulate our story and our differentiation?
Right. It's not like you're running into the 18 other venture-backed neobanks for Black entrepreneurs.
Exactly.
You can't, there's no one left to pitch. Like,
Exactly.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense.
So that's kind of how I created the list. And then I went to people that I knew and said, like, who's missing from this? Like, who do you know and who's missing? And so they were able to add to it and say, like, okay, I can make intros here. Here's who you should be thinking about as well. And so that was kind of like how I curated the, like, couple hundred investors.
Oh, that's was it a couple of hundred people?
Oh, yeah, it's a long list. It was
Okay.
a long list. Yeah.
And did you actually like reach out to everybody, or like what were the numbers of the
like actual people that I pitched?
Yeah.
I'm thinking about I use Airtable actually. I'm thinking about what's left, and I think maybe there's like 75, so probably like 200, 250
Gotcha.
investors I reached out to, or people reached out on my behalf, and I track that too. Like people denied an intro, and so I'm like, okay, that put them on the list, and everyone has like a status. Yeah, it was really meticulous at the beginning, and I lost that kind of rigor towards the end, but
just crawling to the finish line by the end of it, like. So similar process.
Yeah,
where did you source names
from? There's a few.
I think your lawyer introduced us, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah.
My
you came
lawyer
from
did.
Rattler,
Yes,
right?
from Rattler, yeah. But there's a bunch of like founder communities that that you can tap into. I was part of like On Deck founders community, so On Deck. So they also have a list that people curate. I know there's a list that Trace Cohen keeps somewhere. There's a bunch of like VCs on there. If you search for Twitter, to be honest, Twitter has a lot of threads of just people sharing the list of VCs out there, and they usually do a pretty good job of keeping it up to date. OpenVC was another one, I think, that they keep a list of VCs as well. I would say those are the main sources, but I think, and I also probably reached out to like probably around 200 as well. Probably spoke with at least 75 to 100 of them. Yeah, and
so is that a function of roughly like a 50% hit rate of getting a meeting?
So I think this was also a function of what happened, obviously, during the year, because we started this process, like, I don't know when we started this process, but we started the process when like the recession kind of hit, like quote unquote recession. I don't think we're still.
You're just waiting for things to tank, and you're like, I'm going out now.
So we got a lot of meetings, and then things slowed down a lot, and then we got more meetings. I think people were still working, quote unquote, whether or not they committed was a very different question. So we constantly needed to do more meetings. So that was just unusual, I would say, compared to just like the past few years. Yeah.
And what was your timing? What start to finish?
It took me, gosh, we closed in like July or something, and so yeah, I would say like 5 or 6 months.
Gotcha.
But I was talking to people for a long time because we did like that smaller friends and family round that had a couple VCs in it, and I was strategic about that because it was like December of 2021, and so everyone still cared about race and sorry, I mean like come on, right? Like everyone like on Twitter was like, I want to help Black founders. So I like used a lot of that to just like, test and figure out what stories resonated and that type of thing. So it feels like I've been pitching forever.
I'm even surprised that you think that there was still care in December of 2021. I sort of felt like in 2020 that was the end.
Well, like 2020, it was like a lot of hand wavy and like press announcements, and then like I feel like 2021 was when people were like trying to implement the strategy a little bit, and now.
How do I give everyone a black square, basically, on my
exactly.
Instagram? Gotcha. Okay. And now we're caring about
Climate.
Back to nothing.
Yeah.
See how long climate lasts for.
I think the care stopped when Joe Lonsdale posted his here's what I think of Black founders, and basically me and one other VC responded and nobody else said anything. And so, that's a whole.
Oh really? I don't have Twitter.
This is better.
Yeah. Like I have it, but it's not on my phone.
Yeah. But if you ever want to get angry at something, that's a Twitter thread that anyway, so we're out pitching and we're trying to get intros, and I'd be curious, did you guys notice that there was a certain type of person who was doing the intro, whether it was like later stage VCs to earlier stage VCs, or like lawyer intros, or from founders that actually had a better hit rate than others, that the intros netted you more meetings?
I'm just thinking about, I think there's just certain networkers or scouts that are just very well connected to people. Usually those are the people that were able to get us a lot of meetings. They're usually ex-founders or current founders, less so, because current founders are usually just so busy that they just don't really have time. And so a lot of ex-founders, I would say, that have either exited or just understand the process and want to help out at this point. So they're usually the ones that's like able to send out like 10, 20 emails to people. So usually those are pretty good.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Also, my lawyer is like an LP in a lot of funds, so he was really helpful.
Sedette.
Yeah. And yeah, I think like just between investors that I knew that were just like not at the stage or in the industry, but like, had conviction in me as an individual, what we were building. Like never the, I don't know, I've gotten intros from people who've passed before, and I just like, again, use that as practice, but never like have high expectations of those meetings, being fruitful in any way. But sometimes I was wrong. It worked out.
I would say being on the receiving end of these intros, I actually don't think that at least to me, that who makes the intro really matters that much, to be honest. And maybe if it's like somebody that I've done a deal with before that I think has a really great nose for people and all that sort of stuff. But to be honest, some VCs do deals that I like and some do deals that I don't like, and I can't think of a single meeting where I looked at the pitch, wasn't thrilled, but took the meeting because of who made the intro. So it really all comes down to was the actual pitch was any good or not. Do you have a question about it?
So I'm curious, both of you seem to have evolved exactly how you were addressing the problem and have pitched over 200 people. How do you differentiate between if someone says no, or volume of people say no, needing to tweak the pitch or the story or the exact product approach, versus it being a numbers game of you're going to get a lot of no's, so you just got to keep pitching more people, and it's not going to be a fit for everyone.
Cool. That's literally was my next question. But one example that I'll give of that is, and by the way, I was just telling somebody before, I think there's too much of a sense of like, you have one shot and only one shot. And there are definitely companies that have pitched me multiple times, or I've, maybe not pitched me multiple times, but I've sort of come back around to them and things were different. In fact, one of my best performing portfolio companies, Petal, the credit card company where I led the seed round, had pitched me maybe like 9 or 10 months earlier under a different name. They pitched me and I was like, yeah, I don't know what this is. Like, are you your own brand? Are you a powered by platform? Like what? And they just like hadn't really figured it out yet. So they gave some like mishmash answer and I was like, you guys still need to do work, you know, whatever. And I said no. And then I was talking to another VC about like things in New York they were seeing or whatever. And he's like, oh, well, there's this, you know, company Petal and they're doing stuff that is like, isn't about FICO scores or whatever. And I was like, that vaguely sounds like a version, one of the many versions that this other company like threw on a wall to see what stick. I think it was called like Credit something. He's like, yeah, Credit Bridge, it's the same company, same founders. And I was like, oh, well, that's a much better delivery of the pitch. And I came back around and I was like, hey, it looks like you guys figured your stuff out. And so then they came in to sort of talk about it. But had they come back and said, yeah, I know we sent you some mishmash back in January and now, you know, we have something real, like I would have totally taken that. And I don't know if anybody saw you early, came back, you said you went out a little bit to people and maybe stayed in touch with some of those folks. So how did that iterative process work itself out? Like what changes did you make over?
I wish I was like more strategic about it. I don't know that I was really. And maybe it's just like hubris of just like, well, you don't get it. And so just kind of not being like, I'm not going to burn a bridge or anything, but I don't know that there was a moment where I was like, you know, I'm going to change my product because I'm getting a lot of no's. It was more of like, okay, well, how, I think I've heard, actually, sorry to like backtrack a little bit. What I did do was internalize some of the language where investors that were excited about what I was building, I kind of a tell for me is like when people start to pitch me on what I just pitched them, but with different language, I'll take some of the phrasings and then incorporate that in what I'm saying. And so that was a little bit strategic, but otherwise, I think just over time, you pay attention to like what gets a lot of head nods, what questions are coming up. I was also a former educator, so for me, it's like pitching is lesson planning. So I'm gonna be like, all right, well, what do I need you to walk away with in this 30-minute call, and what questions can I anticipate and like kind of plan for and bake into what I'm saying. And so that's kind of how I approach it a little bit. I don't know if my story like really changed or like was really strategic about changing my story based on feedback that I got in that way.
And I would also say your product is fairly straightforward. Like a neobank, like you will have certain go-to-market plans based on your, but like a neobank is a neobank. Yeah. Like there isn't like a lot of ways to tinker with like you are building a financial institution. Like
yeah, yeah, basically.
Yeah, I would say for us, definitely iterated and changed the pitch a little bit throughout. But what's funny is what we started with, I actually came back to that in the end because for us, like we're technically climate, we're also ag tech, we're also food tech. So we tried pitching, you know, in food, in ag, and in climate. And I think what changed towards the end was just like, you know, our mission is still climate, and regardless how we get there, that is what we care most about. And I think that was just what resonated most for us, and when we pitch, that resonated most to the investors that we pitched. And I think at the end of the day, you know, you want to work with investors that care about your mission too, and so we reverted back to the original pitch. But during the first couple of months when we were trying to pitch different VCs, we did have different versions of our story a little bit, but we ended up just simplifying everything and say, you know what, we're here to solve for the food waste problem. Mushroom is one product to get there, and we're gonna eventually have other products to get there, but mushroom is a big enough market. Do you believe in us to be able to build this, right? So
I think one thing is you have to be a little bit careful coming in with like sort of the trench coat and watch approach of like, oh, do you want these? Like, give me one of these or whatever. Because then if you appear too flexible, then I feel like you just want money from me. You don't really care. If I think it's X, then you're going to be X. If I think it's Y, you're going to be Y, and that is not a strong pitch.
Yeah, I mean, even like the point that you just made of like coming back to the core of your mission. Like my pitch has like structural racism on slide 1, and so for me at the beginning, it's also a little bit of a litmus test of like, is this the thing that you're going to bristle at? Because if it is, then like we don't need to move on with this. Like it's not going to work. And so definitely like kind of sticking with that, even when I got feedback of like, maybe you want to not talk about structural racism up front, Kelly. Like that might, turn people off. And I'm like, well, I think it's going to turn the right people off. That's kind of the point.
Anybody who can't have a structural racism conversation is not going to be an investor of yours.
Right, and that's fine. I mean, it's not fine. It's not fine. But I want to know early.
And like Kelly Ifill says structural racism is
for the YouTube.
Okay. Cool, there's a question here.
Yeah, sorry, just following up on exactly what you guys are talking about, because I got feedback yesterday from someone who is a woman who has a financial platform for women. It's called Navit. I don't know if you've come across it. And she said, don't even try to talk about impact with VCs. She's like, I think that was my mistake. I went in talking about women gathering generational wealth and impact, and she was like, they do not care about impact. They want to know, is your market big enough? Will it, whatever, so for both of you with impact, I'm so curious how you respond to that.
I mean, you have to believe in your story. That's the most important thing. It has to come across as authentic. So I think that's most important, to be honest. So I personally don't agree. While saying that, you obviously need to know what market you're going after, right? VCs at the end of the day is generating returns for their LPs, and so understanding how you do this, create the financial model to be able to get the market sizing is really important. And it doesn't have to be something that you need to solve for immediately, but knowing where you could potentially get to in the future and to be able to tell that story is really important, and connecting it back to the impact. Because we have a lot of investors that's like, how big is the mushroom market really, right? And sometimes I go, well, do you eat food? Is food big enough as a market? So anyway, so yeah.
Similarly, I think like one, they're impact investors. So like the idea that VCs don't care about impact is kind of not true. But also it's like that's the reason you're building the company, right? Like you care about it. And so I think as long as you're able to answer both, like here's the size of this market, here's like how we think we can get there, and here's why it's sustainable. I think that's the story. Like obviously we're all capitalists, we're here, but like if you have an impact mission, then I don't think you should necessarily shy away from it.
Yeah. I think one of the things is you have to establish market size in the same breath as the impact that you can make. Because each of you were talking about impact. As a VC, I wanted you to make a lot of impact, right? And so, because ideally your business model, the impact you make is tied to the revenue you make. So you have to establish that. And if you don't, the impact alone isn't going to get there. But it can certainly be part of the story. Like I led an investment in a reusable diapering company called Assembly. And diapers are like 30% of all of the non-biodegradable stuff that winds up in landfills. And it's also like an $11 and $12 billion market, right? So I don't know whether 10% of the market is gonna go reusables or 50%, right? But I do think that the impact and the size of that impact is going to drive consumer change. And so, like, yes, I'm glad to be helping remove some of these, potential diapers from landfills, but I'm more excited about the fact that I think consumers will be motivated by the impact, and even if it's 10% of consumers, it's still a really big outcome, and it's a big market, and I can make a lot of money for my LPs. So you can tie the impact into it, but it needs to be a big enough outcome. Okay, so first checks versus lead checks. So you're out there pitching. Actually, I'll ask a question. Both of you had mentioned you raised sort of small amounts before you like really got going. how did you figure out like security terms? How much? Like, were those people who knew you already? Like, what was that sort of little mini pre-round like?
I wanted to do a safe because it was just easier. I didn't really understand like the difference between safe and convertible. It was just easy for me to say I can just like gather some money and move forward. And
did you target an amount and you're just like, let me see what I can get?
I didn't target an amount. I think like it was like a little bit of a gut check. Like, can I leave my job with this amount? Can I like build an MVP with this amount? And like, so kind of had a rough, like less than $1 million in my mind, but I, talked to a couple like angels, again, like had my list of people, and kind of just went out and got a couple checks in that way. Because it was a safe, I was able to like kind of just cobble it together.
And it sounds like as people said yes, they closed, they wired. As
Yeah.
opposed to waiting for a critical amount.
Yeah, I definitely, and I didn't know that, like, as much as I worked in VC before, I didn't really understand or know the structure of like waiting. It didn't make sense for me to like wait for everyone to come in. So it was like you said, yes, like here are the wire instructions. So, yeah.
Which, as a founder, you should totally do that. As an investor, you should never do that. Because if you're literally like the first 25K check in and it turns out you're the only idiot, like, you're gonna lose it, because there's nothing that most plans can do with just that amount of money. But many angels and folks who know you write small checks like don't even ask the question. They're just like, okay, yeah, count me in for 10 or 25 or whatever, and they write the check and you send them the wire instructions and you do it immediately and they close.
Yeah.
Stupidly, but
It worked out.
It worked out.
Another question on that?
Sure.
Related to that? If you do take that first check, though, you set the valuation. Right?
Yes.
So that you're saying you should take it, but I would be a little bit nervous about taking that first check if I set valuation 10 and everyone's saying 10. There's no way I'm valuing this company at 10 million. Then what do you do?
That's a solvable problem, though. So let's say you do that, right? And you're just like, your cousin who just hit the lottery is like, yeah, sure, 10. What do I care? You're a good guy. And then everybody else is like, 10, right? If it turns out that the feedback that everybody is giving you is 5 is actually the real number, you can go back to your cousin and be like, hey, listen, I don't want to screw you. Can we just re-sign this for a better deal? Like, unless he's an idiot, he's going to be like, yeah, sure, sign me up for a better deal. I'm happy that everybody else brought me down. Technically, you don't actually have to do that. I think it's reasonable and right that you go back to him and be like, listen, everybody else closed at like a 2x better valuation than you did, so I feel like, I shouldn't hold you to this. But technically, safes are all individual documents. You could have 30 people closing for all different numbers, but I don't think that's fair.
Yeah.
But you can also do safe MFN, right? When you close at the same, so all the investors that comes in, they all have the same valuation.
Yeah, and I think, talking about the valuation question earlier too, like, when we did our first round last year, just a small friends and family, it was basically what the market was at generally for pre-seed. You just look at your market comps, look at what other startup founders are raising at, and you see what the market is willing to bear. Usually, to your point, like angels don't really care, especially if they're just like, individually wealthy people, they don't really care as much. But when you go raise for VCs, that's when you're gonna start getting some sense of like, okay, if you're raising on a safe, you can technically set those terms. I think Charlie was great in the sense that like he was very transparent.
He said he means pain in the ass.
No, he was very transparent. Like he was very transparent as to where the market was at. Some VCs may not want to do that with you, and it was great to have that conversation with someone that is like that, because that helps us set, a boundary of what we can raise at, whether or not we were too optimistic versus not, right? So I think a lot of it is just, but valuations is all over the place nowadays, to be honest. Really just who do you want to align yourself at with different comps within the market is how you should think about it. Especially at pre-seed and seed round. Obviously, once you do later on, you need to have the foundations behind your numbers. But early on, it's just whatever the market's willing to bear, you know?
One of the things I said to these guys is that, look, this is the part where we're not aligned, right? I am trying to buy as much of the company as possible. You're trying to sell as little as the company as possible. My goal, and I'm totally transparent about this, is to write a check at a price that you are uncomfortable with, but you don't think I'm an asshole with. Oh, that's all right. Well, we're already offline because of you anyway, so it doesn't matter. But like, that, you know, that you won't feel like you got screwed, but you didn't love it. That level of slight uncomfortability is like, oh, I hit exactly the target, right? Because I'm trying to get the best deal for my investors, and it's a little bit like sales, right? Like if you set your price and you go out and everybody says, yes, you priced too low. Yeah. And you really want some pushback on pricing, say, okay, like this is my ceiling, this is as much as I can sort of get away with. And sometimes that means I might lose a deal. I mean, I've had 2 deals in the last year that, you know, where I did exactly that, and somebody came way down and met me, and somebody else was like, listen, like I've got angels that are willing to close at this ridiculous price, and they said, sorry, we won't be working together. And I was like, yeah, you know, I'm not getting there at that price, and if you can close it, go ahead. But I just want you to keep in mind that you do set the expectations high, right? If you close and if you have friends who are founders that raised on very high valuations last year and are far over their skis, it's gonna be painful the next time around. And what it also means sometimes is, it's not even for your next round, it's like, if or extension or just the ability to like pad and just go a little more, and you're a too high evaluation, that becomes incredibly difficult to raise. And I think you talk to successful founders, chances are they have a round somewhere that people closed on top of previously, that they raised X, they didn't have enough accomplishment to go out for the next one, but people were willing to sort of bridge them and then just, let's just open up the next round, and you know, that's probably a good deal if we get in. But if you're, you know, seed was a post of 25 last year, that's not gonna happen, and people don't like doing crushing down rounds. The existing investors get annoyed, and it just becomes kind of a mess, so you really need to be careful of valuations.
Yeah, I was talking to someone, sorry, I was just anecdote, chatting with someone yesterday, like this is FinTech Week kind of in New York, and this founder was saying that he raised 5 on 60, and I was just like, that,
good Lord.
it was like, that doesn't even make like mathematical sense. Like, why would an investor come in on like 1 million on 60 post?
Hedge fund bros.
I know.
I don't know who's investors are.
I don't know either. And I don't want to know. But yeah, it's just like, I just thought about like, well, what do you do next at this seed round?
It's tough to accomplish enough with $5 million to get a significant bump on a post of 65.
Sorry, I was just going to add to what Charlie said. I think the investor also wants you to close, especially if they've committed to you. They want you to be able to raise the money, right? So which is why we talked about where else we got leads. A lot of it was our investors too, actually. So once they've committed to you, the best thing that you can do is just ask them, like, who can you introduce us to? Who have you invested in the past with? And just ask them to make the introductions directly. That usually works pretty well. And also, anyone who's passed on you, you generally should also ask them, can you introduce me to other people as well? The worst that they can say is no. But they know other investors that they think might be interested. You might be just too early for them. They might know other earlier stage investors. So that also, we've gotten some introductions that way as well. But the investor's incentive is to close the round, so definitely leverage them as much as you can.
I'm gonna slight disagree there. I would say it's fine to get that investor to investor thing if like the other investor just doesn't do food.
Yes.
Right? That it's not a value judgment on this, but if I, you know, get an intro from like Collab Fund that did like Impossible or Beyond or one of the things, and they passed on you, then I'm like, well, why are you passing on this? Because like this theoretically should be a thing that you would do. So, or like even like Stage, like I don't know, for whatever reason, you talk to Bain and like Bain's not doing pre-seed checks, but you know, they're really interested. Although even then I'm like a little skeptical because even the bigger funds will sometimes occasionally slip small checks into stuff they really like. So I would say it's like an acceptable signal, but not a great one. But you could certainly source names for sure. And probably that you have some other connection in your network. But the investor to investor one, if the original person passed, is like not the best one in the world. And you probably get one better. Okay, so let's talk about actually getting to a yes. Was there a correlation between the amount of time you spent with somebody and the chance that they said yes? So, Kelly, like, did the people who said yes, are they the ones that you spent 8 meetings talking to and you spent the most time like convincing them to pull over the line, or not, or all over the board?
I want to say not, but it might be like, it's like either not or all over the board. I definitely know that there, like, I'm thinking of a few investors that I've spent a lot of time with, a lot of meetings, a lot of follow-ups, and like a lot of, you know, extra documents and stuff. And then they were just like, yeah, we just like can't. And that is like the most frustrating, like wanting to reach through my screen and strangle you because like you knew that. So like
golden seeds.
So like that is to me like, and so when I think about those experiences where like I've spent this exorbitant amount of time, you know, with this, or like, you know, we met in person, this is COVID, like we met in person, we've done all the things, I've hugged you, right? I've touched you, it's crazy, it's a pandemic. And they still said no, like those are like the most frustrating. And then the people who have said yes have been like, from day one, I kind of knew like, it's in the bag. And we had a couple of meetings, they looked at the data room, they asked a few questions, and that was it. Or like they said yes, and they were like, okay, we just like need to get this over the line. And so like, I'm doing the extra work knowing that this is already like solidified. And that experience is completely different. So like the time, it's hard to say, but I know that there are like these funds that, or these investors that just like want to just, I don't know exactly what the strategy is, but just like waste your time, which is really frustrating.
I would say exactly the same. The ones that committed knew early on that they were going to commit, and they usually are much faster. The ones that are long usually did not end up committing in the end.
I think we were 2 meetings, or
pretty much.
2,
It was fast. We worked over the weekend. You emailed a bunch of questions. That was it. We just emailed back and forth. It was super fast.
I think part of the thing is, I think the ones who say yes are kind of 50% of the way there before you even pitch, right? They have some reason, whether they were looking in the space or they know something about it, or like I had previously done a company in the sort of commercial waste area, and had some thoughts as to like why it didn't work out and how it could have worked out. And then they came in and pitched and were like, yeah, we didn't want to do this thing because of this other, and then I was like, yes, exactly, like finally, you know. So I think you'll pick up on the ones who are sort of have already convinced themselves.
But the only thing I would just add is I don't regret doing the extra work, because it actually helped me really clarify our business model, really clarify our financial model, really clarify the go-to-market plan. So I didn't mind that piece of work. It's frustrating when it passed, but it actually did help us accelerate where we're going to go much faster. It was just frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, some of the documents that I created, I used in subsequent pitches and subsequent diligence. But yeah, the emotion is what it is, but there were some benefits of the, I guess, experience.
One thing I think is important, and I'll get to both of your questions, is understanding how the firm makes decisions. I made that mistake as a fundraiser. When I went to first raise my first fund, I got an early cold reach out based on a Cranes article from a big pool of money. And I got very excited, and they started asking me questions like, what would it look like if we were a majority of the fund? And I was like, holy, these guys are gonna write like a $7 million check. This is awesome, this is the greatest thing. Asking questions, like the pace of questions started to slow down. Like I think I answered all of his questions, right? And then it just started to drag on. And at some point, maybe we started talking at the end of January, and it was like almost June. It was like the end of May, and I was like, this is not going as fast as I thought. And I just was like, hey, so like, how do we close? And he's like, well, we're in the process of hiring a director of fund strategy, and then that person's gonna come up with a fund strategy, and we'll measure you with this. I was like, oh, you don't even have the person who can make a decision. Like, you're just some dude in the organization who's a part of this, but like can't make a decision yet. So when are you thinking this is gonna happen? And they're like, oh, we're thinking X number of months from now. And I was like, ah, okay, so September. It's like, yeah, September sounds reasonable. It's like, great. And how much money are you thinking? And he's like, yeah, like $1 million. I was like, oh, okay. So like September, $1 million, awesome. Penciling you in, like I will come back around to you when you have that person. It's not $7 million in 2 weeks. And that's just sales 101. Like, do you have budget? How do you close? And I failed to ask those questions. I think where that happens a lot in the VC world is the seniority level of the person you're talking to in the firm. You know, there are some firms where like, I don't know if this is still the case, don't quote me on this, but I feel like at one point I'd sent something over to Lear or Hippo, and you needed like 2 partners to say yes, and that was their deal. And so like, you really weren't through their process unless you had met 2 partners. And so you'd spend some time with analysts who's just trying to answer their own questions and get comfortable. You're 3 meetings in, and they're like, yeah, so we took 3 meetings, I think they're about to say yes. I'm like, you haven't met any of the decision makers yet. So you're actually not there, but it's important to ask sort of how you get to yes, and different people have different criteria. Sometimes you'll find out like, oh, they don't lead, and they're just like waiting for you to come up with a lead check, or your size is all off. And I think the language is really important. Is the interested in is one of the most confusing phrases that founders will ever hear, where if somebody says like, yeah, we'd be interested in writing a $500K check at this stage kind of thing, right? Like, we would be interested in parentheses, if we decided we liked this. And what they're really saying to you is, generally at this stage, for the things that have gotten to the end of the process, we tend to be 500K. That does not mean we would like to put in 500K into this business, and in your spreadsheet you should put us down as 80%. And that's where I see the most time something fall down, where I'm sitting with an entrepreneur working through the funnel, and like, these guys said they were interested in like 2-3 million. I was like, are they really interested in? Are they, you know, is there terms, like who did you meet with, and all of that sort of stuff? And that's the one that like falls down the most.
Oh yeah, I always ask like, what is your process? And people, they'll just tell you like, this is the first meeting, and then we do this, and then it's the IC, and then it's consensus in the IC. And so you really, like, people are pretty frank about like what it takes to get to yes. And so that's super helpful all the time. And then like, I don't know, I just am pretty cynical, I think, as a person. And so I'm like, if you didn't say yes to me, like, this is dating. Like, did you ask me out? That is not a yes. So I'm not putting you down as anything until like I know for certain that you're like in it and you're asking for my wire instructions.
That's a balance. You need to make sure that you have very clear timelines, and they should give you timelines too as well, because like if you don't hear back generally, you know, after a week, you can probably guess it's probably going to be a pass, to be honest. But they should be the ones that's setting that process and saying, you know, we have an investment committee meeting, you know, every Monday or every Tuesday. We should be able to get back to you by that time, right? So like, if they don't, generally it's like, they're probably not that interested. Yeah.
One of the best pieces of advice I've heard somebody give founders about the closing process, and also like the FOMO timing thing. If somebody's like, we're closing at the end of the month, and they have no term sheets yet, like, maybe you are, maybe you're not. Maybe it's gonna take longer than that, but like, there's nothing in here that says I need to make a decision by then, because this round's not a train leaving the station. I think that happened to a lot of people over the summer, where just the whole market was moving really slowly. But I do appreciate if somebody says, my plan is to spend 2 weeks with each investor. So if you can't come to a yes or a no in 2 weeks, I'm moving on, which is different, right? It's not a fake deadline like, everybody else is going to close, you're going to miss this out. It's just like, no, listen, if you can't make a decision in 2 weeks, I'm just assessing you as like not that interested. If you want to tell me you have a 3-week process, that's fine. I'll spend 3 weeks with you, right? But you tell me when I should stop trying with you and what that date is, and then I will just move on to a new cohort of people. And I think that works great because I have all sorts of stuff like in the shop, and sometimes I lose track of like, oh, I meant to get back to them. I am actually interested, but I realize now it's been a week and a half since I've talked to them. And so if you set the pace, every meeting, when can we talk next? Like, do you want to talk next? Like, just know, move people along, and if they're not moving along, then they should probably fall down to the bottom of the process. But we have 2 questions here. I want to.
Yes.
Gotcha.
My question was, how do you guys prioritize time when you fundraise? Do you continue doing your work, or are you solely focusing on fundraising and you delegate the actual work to your co-founders or employees if you have any?
Good question.
Fundraising is very time consuming, yes, and you want to move as fast as possible, if possible. And one thing that we didn't talk about a lot is just like, because Charlie mentioned this, it's just like back channeling between VCs as well, because VCs do talk behind each other's backs. So like, if you slow down, you know, they'll be wondering why is this deal not closing. So in general, yes, like I do put in a lot of time into fundraising, and I try to like have my co-founders take on some of the work as much as possible. If you don't have co-founders, you're a solo founder, yes, it will be more challenging, unfortunately, but you need to make sure you don't lose track, because it's really important to just keep on going. It's very tough emotionally, especially when you get a lot of passes and rejections. So I would just say, you know, take some time for yourself when you need to, you know, take a break, you know, take a longer weekend, but definitely continue to like keep on it.
Yeah, 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I don't have a co-founder, so I can't like stop. So it was like, it definitely is taxing. So I have like a really strict regimen. Like I work out in the mornings and I have therapy weekly, and I don't miss those things. Like it's self-care for me, and I didn't realize how important it was until I really got into like the midst of fundraising, and I had to go from like being rejected from someone that I was really excited about, and then like, you know, pumping the team up or talking about product and roadmap, and like, you know, back to back, because there isn't anybody else. And so that it's hard, but my reality is like I can't like just only focus on fundraising, because then, you know, things aren't moving.
The one thing I would say is that I like when people keep working on, because there's the reality of you don't have money in the bank, and so you don't have other work to do. Yeah. Like you maybe you're pre-product, and until you hire developers and have money, there's just nothing that can get started in terms of being built, is hiring. You may not have the money to close on someone, but you have the time to find those people. And so you're always gonna have gaps on your team. And so, you know, if you come in and you're like, I talked to a company yesterday that really needs a brand marketer on the team. And they were basically like, yeah, we're going to hire a brand marketer when we close. And like, there's nothing stopping you from like taking brand marketer meetings, especially just given the cadence of fundraising. You're gonna send out a bunch of pitches, and then little by little, people are gonna get back to you. And there's just gonna be time gaps, right? And so you have time to take other types of meetings. So it's much more compelling to me when we're talking about the gaps on your team, and you're like, yeah, I'm meeting a great candidate. Or for the investors who seem interested, being like, hey, do you mind talking to this candidate? I would love to get your feedback on them. And it just signals for like, oh, this person's still doing stuff. Like they're not waiting for me. Like they're building the company. We're, you know, shooting the shit on the side about like this poor stream is like the kids are, is like, this is like the work on the board would be, basically. And so this is like being an investor in those companies. We had a good conversation about why this brand marketer isn't a fit. And so now I'm like, oh, I kind of like working with this person or whatever. So hiring is a place where there's always more stuff to do and an opportunity to get better at it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I usually just a tactic, I don't know whether it works well, but I usually, whenever I follow up with investors, I always generally have an update of what's going on with the business, because I'd like them to see that we're moving along. We're signing a new client, or we're pushing something with a new product, you know, so that there's always a conversation topic.
Sometimes they send you mushrooms.
Yeah, I get them to visit the farm. That actually works really well. Getting them come see the farm actually works really well. But in general, like, be creative with like the touch points that you have with your investors would be one suggestion. Not just like, oh, where are things at? You know, can we talk again? More like, this is what's going on with us. Would love to tell you more about it. You know, yeah.
Did you have a question too? Or?
Yeah, you answered it a little bit. It was largely in when you get the sense that, because I do think you develop the muscle memory or spidey sense of when something's likely to be a yes or a no. And if the no's are asking for further diligence or things like that, what your perspectives are on both ends of the conversation of how to hold your boundary about maybe not doing the extra meetings, or
when you feel like they're just creating work for you.
Yeah, but not to burn a bridge or be unprofessional, but just to, whether it's literally email templates, you know, how firm are you? And I think it's a great framing to say, I'm going to spend 2 weeks in this, or if you tell me your process is 3 or 4, like, I'm going to honor that. So I love that, but I'm curious other things that you start to feel like, you know, someone's just kind of taking the call, or maybe they're learning for the sake of learning, but it's not benefiting you, and you have scarce time.
Did you guys turn down any investors because you just felt like they were being a pain in the neck?
Not because they were a pain in the neck. I've like not sent my deck or not followed up with investors that were just like on the call. I was like, why am I here? I don't like you. You don't like me. Like, let's just not do this. And so I just like let it end. I had like recently actually, it was an investor that like got on the call and I was like, you are like, your main LP is like antithetical to everything I believe in the world. Like, what am I doing? And then I was like, yeah, I'll send the deck. And
That's actually a good question. Of like, is it a criteria for you, especially like probably easier now that you're on the latter half of or close to done with the round? Did you have to like your investors?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like,
that was a loaded question, admittedly.
Yeah, I mean, so I think for me, it's more important to make sure that like they're mission aligned. And so that's a non-negotiable. Absolutely, I don't ever want to like, well, so what do you think about like making it for everybody, or like those kinds of questions are just icky. And then if I like you, like, I'm a little bit of an asshole, and so like I get like I can kind of not like you, and like I'm a little bit more flexible in that. But like, can we work together? Do you understand how I work, who I am? Like, all of those things are really important. But like,
I call it style agnostic.
Yeah.
you're you know, you have a way about you, which is maybe not my way, but I can still respect you.
Exactly.
And, you know.
Like, will we like go out for drinks?
Yeah.
But like, some of them I'm like excited about. I was like in the car jamming to music with one of my investors, and like, that's great. With all of them, no.
It's like a clown car, basically.
Yeah, I would say it depends on how active they are. If they're just going to be passive investors, I don't mind as much, like, because I'm not going to interact with them. And if they don't have like massive check sizes, then it's also fine. As long as they're aligned with the mission, you know, like, I don't have to like them individually as a person, as long as they care about the mission.
Yeah.
I wound up in, there was a deal where one of my companies in a deal that I was leading was introduced to another VC, and as it turns out, the VC's spouse is one of the top lobbyists against a group that this person identifies with. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't know, like, they chose not to say anything about it. They just sort of politely declined to take money from this person. I totally would have said something, but and I kind of still want to say something, but it's not mine to do. But we just can't realistically take money from this person, and it's not like it's the spouse's money, but like, you decided to spend the rest of your life with somebody who has dedicated their mission to being against who this founder is, and so that's just not gonna fly.
That's wild.
We'd have to be pretty desperate to take. And also, there's no world in which the only $1 million is coming from that person and no one else likes it. I mean, there'd have to be some, you know, VC cruise that goes down in the middle of the ocean and this is the last one, and so, you know, or something like that for that to ever work out, so.
Yeah. Curious to hear your view on the warm-up process. So at some point there's like a color-coded spreadsheet, and then at some other point there's like hopefully a blitz with lots of meetings. What happens in between, right? It takes time, there's introductions. Do you talk to investors, say, hey, I'm not raising right now, I just want to know you? Do you forego that and go, just wait until you're fully ready and go straight into it? How do you think about warm-up?
My perspective is you're trying to build a company, so for me, I generally don't want to spend time with investors unless I'm actually actively fundraising, especially because there's a lot that I don't like about them. Some I like. So I just want to focus on building the company. That's what I care about. So for me, relationships important. So when I fundraise, I do see, you know, can I build a relationship with these people that are maybe later stage investors that might do, you know, a longer range of investment. So those are the people I would probably like warm up for the future. And then I'll keep them updated in terms of our progress with like investor updates, all that stuff. But outside of that, I usually don't like to spend a lot of time like just like
Chit-chat.
You know, networking with investors, yeah. And to be honest, like I'm gonna rely on Charlie when we fundraise again, and Charlie's gonna introduce me to a lot of people. So I'm gonna rely on him to introduce me to people in the future, yeah. So rather than me trying to do it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, same. I also like had the benefit of like working with some VCs before, so I had a little bit of a network. But I think, you know, one thing that people do is like doing like an investor update, just like adding everybody to it, which is like still work. But I don't see a lot of value in talking to investors if they're not, like if I'm not asking them for, like there's not money like we're talking about exchanging. So yeah, no.
That's
like,
our whole value, just basically. If we can't write a check, then so with us, it's fine.
But I do think, you know, there are, you know, some investors who are former operators in my space who like I will talk to in like more of an advisory capacity. And so those people I find value in, but really just like, if it's not going to like, if I'm not going to benefit from it, like the purpose of just knowing an investor is like, that's not necessarily the most valuable use of my time.
I also think I met somebody. No, she's not here. Yes, the other day, and who I asked. I was like running out, and by the way, and not to be like unfriendly or dismissive, but like the worst time you could ever explain your entire pitch is like bum rushing the panel after. Because like mentally the investor's like on to wherever they're going, and like my daughter has a pediatrician's appointment, so that's like as soon as I'm done, like, you know, that's where I'm mentally focused, and like there's a line, there's people waiting, like just say, hey, I you know, here's who I am, here's my name, here's my company, I'm gonna send you my stuff later. And when you send the note, like you emailed me already, like from the other day, like I know it's still sitting there, but the point being though, I asked this person to send me their deck, and she was like, I'm not fundraising right now. And it's like, you went to a fundraising panel, you came up to talk to me like, this is what I do for, you know what I do for a living. And I just basically said like, so you're saying that if I just, you told me your idea right now, and I was like, that's awesome. And if I decided to write you a check right now, you wouldn't take it. And she's like, no. And I'm like, all right. Well, I mean, look, maybe that is her strategy, and it is her company. But it feels a little bit to me, and I used this analogy the other day, like if you know anything about improv, there's this whole concept of yes and, where you just don't want to stop the other person in their tracks. Like they take it off in some really weird direction, and you're like, yes, and it just seems friendlier, it just seems nicer, like it's supposed to be collaborative and all of this sort of stuff. So maybe you're not really raising. Maybe you feel like you have a lot of unanswered questions. It wasn't in your mind to, you know, send me a deck, but if I say send me a deck, send me something. Or just be like, yeah, you know, I'm making a couple of changes to it. I will send it to you as soon as I get a chance. And then like, I'm not waiting for it. I'm not sitting there awake at night like, she has to send me her deck. Like, why isn't she send me her deck? There's plenty of decks in my inbox to go through. If you sent it to me a month later and you're just like, hey, we met up, you asked for the deck, we've been doing a lot of customer talks, you know, over the last month. I'm not gonna fault you for taking a long time to send the deck. I think that's fine, but just, you know, have a way where like, you know, you're always kind of raising, you're always up for a conversation, and don't like pretend not to be raising so as not to see, especially at this round, I think it's fine to be more transactional now, because without cash, you're not doing a lot right now otherwise, for the most part. I mean, you may have a little bit back from friends and family, you need it, right? I think it's fine to be much more transactional now. You're in your worst power dynamic position of like you don't have a lot of accomplishment to show, so you just need volume and numbers of people to talk to get excited about. So I think it's fine to be transactional. What Winson doesn't know is that I am not just going to introduce him to investors when he's ready, but my thing is actually like as you get going, I think it's actually a mistake to 100% focus on the operations of the company for your next round and just think you're going to show up on somebody's doorstep who hasn't heard of you before and just be like, look at this great company I built. And that person's like, I never thought I'd be an investor in a mushroom company. I have to start from scratch. I don't know who you are. You know, and they hear all about like the cool founders and who they should be tracking and all this sort of stuff. So I do think you need to be that way post this close. I'm sure that, you know, Kelly can't wait to talk to more investors after this process.
I had a call before. I was talking. I guess it's a little disingenuous for me to be like, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I'm talking to investors all the time.
Yes.
Like you're constantly in at least I am constantly in a mode of fundraising in some capacity. I'm going to like Money 2020. I was just like at Finovate. So, and there are investors constantly in my orbit because I do know that like, you know, the time in between is not that long for like from one fundraise to another. If it's 18 months and it takes, you know, 4 months to fundraise and a month to prep, like you don't have a whole lot of time in between. So like I am, but I think I'm being strategic about it. So I'm going to go to a conference. I'm going to sit on a panel. I'm going to go to the happy hour. But I'm not going to just like talk to investors that may not be aligned or, you know, like that kind of work is like not, I'm going to be strategic, more strategic now, and less of like a blast.
And it is a sales process, right? To your point, like you're selling your company all the time. So the best way to sell is to more have a pull strategy instead of push strategy. Yeah. So when I answer that question, it's just like, I don't want to have to sit there and like pitch like 75 VCs in like a period of a few months, because that is not a fun process. No. What is ideal is I'm gonna start, you know, building out the company. People are gonna hear about us. We're gonna sell to like grocery stores and restaurants, and we're gonna organize like events and do comms, and that's where you're gonna see a lot of people coming into you. Yeah. And that's where I'm gonna have these conversations. I'm always on the open. If there's a great strategic VC for us that wants to invest in us, we're gonna have that conversation. I just don't want to sit down and like run the same process again. That's what
exactly.
I mean. Yeah,
I can understand. I think like there's also just like to some extent that like sometimes people forget that like it's still like two humans that have to work together, and so like being personable and like being likable and doing all of that like soft stuff is really important, because like no one wants to feel like they're just money, even though we kind of joke about it. Yes. So you still do have to like do the things that, you know, you build relationships pre-COVID when you like would go to drinks with somebody or go to coffee with somebody. I am doing that kind of stuff where I enjoy it. I'm extroverted, so it's a little bit easier for me, but yeah, just like making sure that you kind of remember that there's like people at the end of this.
Cool. Sorry, so just a little confused because I got like opposite answers for this kind of before raising the seed round stage. Is it a yes or no for like a slow burn, having those introductions, so when you're ready to raise, you can just hit go, or is this not a good use of time?
Well, I'd say one thing is you're saying seed, and I think we may be answering that in terms of like your first round, because seed for many people is like a year and a half after starting the company, they've raised a pre-seed, and so I do. If you guys let me know if you said anything differently. You are going to be building relationships over time for your next round, but for your first dollars in, when there's not a lot of progress to show and you just need to figure out who's going to be in for something like this and who's not, I would say go from the beginning. Don't waste time. Figure out who wants to do this, but build relationships for later rounds over time.
Got it.
Okay, cool. So we'll take these three and then we'll let these guys go back to running their companies. So,
okay, so I have a question specifically for you. According to TechCrunch, startups raised $9 billion in 2018. Of that, black startups got 1%, and black women like us got half a penny on every dollar. So as I'm in the process, I'm starting the nation's first Black-owned sports network, and I'm turning down investors because I don't think they understand what we're doing or let us continue to do it. What is your recommendation for women like me? Because Steve is my business manager, and I never come to these things because they never address my situation. But you know, you have a different situation. So what is your advice to other women who are black women who are trying to raise money, and what would you say to?
Dang, she's recording me? What would you say?
I mean, you might still be recording here too, I don't know.
I mean, I'm interested in why, like who you're turning down and like why they're not a good fit for you. So not to put the question back on you, but when you said that, but I'll answer your question as best as I could.
Please.
I think like, it's a hard one, right? Like, you know the stats, and so it is a little demoralizing to go in and be like 0.002% of people like me have raised money, but like I can't do anything about that. And so I think for the thing that worked for me was like knowing that and then just kind of putting it aside to say that like people might be sexist, they might be racist, or people are racist, people are sexist, and that's going to impact this outcome, but I can't change that in the course of this 45-minute call. And so I'm just going to show up as Kelly. I'm going to like do the best, pitch the best, be strategic about the people that are, you know, that I'm trying to talk to, that I'm trying to reach out to, but like I can't do anything about the stats other than try to like make it better. I don't know if that is helpful or not.
Okay, but if you said missions align, obviously the mission wouldn't align. So my case, we're going to be showcasing black athletes, and so I decided to go another route. I'm a sports writer, so I've been working with like football, street ball, you know, Carmelo, directly with the players.
Yeah.
Melo writes checks.
Melo has a tech investment fund.
Yeah.
He's an early investor in what's the company, Lyft, and a bunch of other stuff. A lot of the players are.
Does he have your deck?
I haven't sent it to him. Because
Okay, you can't get a check from him unless she's got your deck.
The players, they always get in trouble, and they do a lot of dumb stuff, and I don't want to be aligned to their money and their decision-making process.
Yeah.
Because sure, I could call Deshaun Watson today.
Yeah.
And get a lot of money, but would you have?
He doesn't seem like too much of a dumb stuff guy, though. I'm a co-investor with him.
And to answer your question, was Hulu. Hulu gave me $1 million valuation, and so they can get me to, they'll give me the $10 million by the end of the year. But that's a Disney company, right? And that Disney also owns ESPN, so that would just be utter conflict.
I mean, so like, I think there's an argument to be made that it's not, right? Like, you're not competing with ESPN today, right? And so like.
But I am.
Okay,
have
but
a lot of broadcast rights.
I think maybe this is very specific to your company, but maybe
no, specific to all women, because
no, the ESPN point.
If we're doing things that people want us to say, well, include other people, we water down our whole mission in the process. So
yeah, but and so like I have, you know, had investors push back and say like, can Guava be for like everybody? And like, you know, regulations, I cannot, you know, reject people based on their ethnicity. What I'm doing is centering, it sounds like what you're doing is centering a specific experience, but like anybody's welcome to watch your content. Anyone's, you know, welcome to be a Guava member, but it's who we're centering. and investors who get that, and those who don't kind of show themselves really early on. And I don't have to reject them because they usually say no based on like how I'm presenting Guava and the opportunity that I'm putting in front of them. And so like I think for both of us, like just being mission aligned has been helpful, so that there aren't people in the mix who I feel like are going to try to push me in different directions if ever it came to that.
One thing I'll add, and I'll caveat that coming from my straight white dude perspective, I've written 8 checks to Black founders. I am not targeting some percentage or number, but I think that's probably a higher number than most straight white dude funds. And I'm just trying to find the people who can make my investors the most money. I don't really care who it is. I find this beginning with the statistics part of that conversation really frustrating and misleading, because to your point, everyone has biases, right? Every single person. I do too, right? Because I have written 8 checks to Black founders does not mean I don't have racial biases and unconscious biases around it, right? Both things can be true. That I can sit across the table from a Black founder and think, you're gonna make me a lot of money, and also think other things that I need to be educated better on. I find that most VCs, if not all of them, purely just wanna make a bunch of money, right? And how they interpret who can do that is in some ways narrowly focused or narrow-minded, right? And they don't understand how to, their definitions of what they consider ambition or leadership qualities, whatever, just comes out differently in different people based on their life experience. But the one thing you have to be careful with numbers is that, like, okay, so my number is like 8 out of, I don't know, 95 or 100 deals that I've done. But I don't think that anywhere near 8% of the founders that pitch me are Black, right? So in some ways, Black founders are outperforming my stats, even though like they make up less than 8% of the overall population. So you could say, well, I'm actually underweight where I should be relative to the population, but they're not nearly 8% of my deal flow. Well, why is that? Like, maybe I need to change where I network and all that sort of stuff. The other thing that changes the dollar amount number is the dollar question is vastly disproportionately affected by later stage rounds, right? So one $500 million round is going to be bigger than 500 startups raising their pre-seed rounds. So you could get like one later stage round that really, you know, skews those numbers. And I have to admit, the idea of raising a $350 million round and not quite being profitable yet feels like a big, dumb, stupid, straight white guy idea, right? And there are some founders that come along and say, you know what? I don't want to sell any more of my company. I would rather raise less and have more control, lower my downside risk, and all of that sort of stuff. So if you look at, for example, like Stitch Fix. Stitch Fix only raised $76 million before they got to an IPO. Comparatively, Twitter raised like $1 billion or something like that before they got to an IPO. But the stats will say that somehow that was bad that less money was raised when like.
But I think when we're talking specifically about Black women, the stats like are representative of who's getting funded, right? Like.
But it's also related to how much they're asking for and who's asking. Yes. If you don't make a big, I have never had a straight white guy come in and pitch to me for less than $1 million.
Right.
And I could tell you the only people who have pitched for less than $1 million are either people of color, women, and when I turn around and ask them, do you not know what you would do with $1 million? They're like, oh, of course I know what I would do with $1 million. And it's the most confident thing they'll ever say, but they, I think, and I've asked, see those numbers, and they're just like, well, I thought it was going to be too hard to ask for $1 million or $2 million, and so they're
but I mean, this is a much longer conversation, but I do think like part of that is putting the blame on like the marginalized group, right?
Fair.
Right, like if everything that you read is like Black women aren't raising $1 million. There's like 250.
That's a totally rational reaction.
Right, like 250 people raise $1 million.
Right.
Am I gonna be that, or am I gonna try to raise 500 or 750? Like, is the decision?
But I would
that
say
people
no.
make?
Don't try and raise 750. If your number's 2 million, ask for the 2 million.
But I think that's changing now, right? Like, I think there are investors who are like aware of this conversation, aware of the numbers, aware of the stats, that are just like, okay, well, I need to think about this differently or recognize my bias. I'm going to be objective here.
Yeah. No. I don't think they do. I think most investors just take what is pitched, right? And I think most investors who, when they have a founder come in and ask them for less than $1 million, will say that founder's not ambitious.
Yeah.
And they just don't think about what it is like to be that founder who reads that stat and what they must think of the venture process and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, but it's also just that, like, even in my experience, that like I have friends who are neobank founders, and so I know how much they raise, I know the valuations, and I'm just like, I also know your product. I know how many customers are on this product, and I know people are telling me my valuation is too high, or I'm not going to raise that much, even though it is absolutely in line with what the market is saying.
Right.
And so, like, there's nothing left for me to think, if nothing, that like, this is a woman, I'm a woman. The difference that I'm Black and she's not, and we're getting very different feedback about what the market will tolerate. And so, like, that is the thing that I kind of come away with, and so. Do you internalize that and change the number, or do you just kind of like bullishly move forward and try to like be successful, knowing that it's going to protract the process?
And
like
even information and knowledge isn't shared fairly across. Like, right, there's a disproportionately low number of Black women in fintech who was in a position like you to know how much everybody else raised and how much everybody's revenues are. Right? And so like that is part of it too, right? Is to say that like, well, the people who are asking for more are the people who know what everybody else raised because they're in the insiders club already, and who's in that club, and that affects the fundraising too. Anyway, we're gonna have a whole, just the two of us are gonna have a whole session about that, but I always tell people, like, make your ask for how much you actually need. Like, you will definitely run into people with their own biases. That is 100% true. I think you have less of a shot if you sandbag your asks because it is like, you know, the money is disproportionately placed to people who don't look like you, because I just think that it is going to signal for being less ambitious or whatever, and I think that doesn't help you. Not to, you know, to place that blame, but it's like do your thing and make your ask. Did you have a
no, I actually I agree with that point specifically of like asking for it, because a lot of investors would just think that you're too early otherwise. You're not asking for what you actually think you might need or you actually want to be able to build that company. So I totally 100% agree with you, because we ran into situations where we were like, we just, you know, but from my perspective, it's because I know my business and I know how efficiently I can run it. That's why I'm asking for what I need. But for them, they're like, well, actually, you probably need a lot more if you're gonna grow this into much bigger. But, you know, I'm okay with that, because for me, I'm like, I'm gonna prove to you, or the investors next step, that I'm gonna build a much more profitable business based on what I can do, and therefore raise a much bigger round and a bigger valuation in the future. That's what I wanna do as a founder, but for investors, they don't see it that way. Yeah, so definitely ask for what you need and more.
We had another question in this general area. Cool. And I think you'd be the last one.
So looking back over this entire time period, if there was something that you learned and you can go back in time and tell yourself, like, damn, I wish I would have known this when I first started the process, what do you think that or those things would be?
I would say there's a couple of things. I thought about that question a little bit before joining the session. I would say one thing that we didn't touch upon today is just like, there's a lot of capital out there. So definitely think about where you want to find your capital. You know, VCs is definitely one route, but there's other types of capital out there as well. So grants, foundations. There's a lot of grants now for just like non-equity stuff as well, especially if you're doing impact stuff. Debt financing is definitely one route as well. We want to go after that. We raised a little bit of money through like a crowd syndication platform too, which worked out quite well for us. So definitely really think through like multiple options. It is like a sales process. You want to expand your funnel as much and as wide as possible, and just really figuring out where to target your time. But you have to knock through the entire funnel. That's how it should work. So that's one thing I would say. And then the other thing that I would say is just like take care of yourself. It's hard to get rejections. It's genuinely very, very, very difficult because you do feel like it's on you, especially if you're the founder and CEO. You feel like you're not good enough. So definitely, take care of yourself as you get through that process. Yeah.
The thing that comes to mind for me is just being strategic about when I pitch like my dream investors. There were certain investors that I got meetings with really early on that I kind of wonder, had I had a couple more reps in, would the outcome be different? Probably not, based on their track record, but that I just would have felt better about the outcome. And so just being thoughtful about, what tranche of investors do I feel like I can practice on? Who are the dream investors that I want to like make sure I'm like in top shape for? It's kind of something that I would do differently, or next time around be more thoughtful about. And I think like the taking care of yourself part, I did that, but didn't realize like how important it was to do that, and just like going for walks and just like clearing my head and those kinds of things. But just like making sure you bake that into the process, because it's hard. It's hard to like put your dream on display and someone be like, nah. Or like see that they read your deck 30 seconds before the meeting. Like those kinds of things are just like a little demoralizing, and just like not taking it personally.
Now I'm realizing that everyone who pitched me first, I was just their safety school. So I'm just really gonna sulk home. I want to thank these guys for spending all this time with us. Really, really appreciate both of you, and thanks everyone for coming. Take more.
Charlie.
Hey.